Okay, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and last week we had looked at some of Caleb Maupin's attempt to sort of completely rewrite Marx and Engels on the family in order to just twist it in a completely reactionary direction. And I got some interesting feedback from that, in particular from one of the people who was sort of nodding along to his bullshit. And what was really interesting in the exchange that followed was the excuse that they made for the for Maupin deciding to address a group of fascists, a group of Nazbols led by Alexander Dugin. They replied that, oh, no, 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 he just happened to be at the conference on alternatives to globalization. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because, and so let's just look at the speech that he gave at this conference. No, I mean, and indeed, when you look at the title of the video, he really does avoid pointing out who he's actually speaking to here. I think even he realizes that it is not a good look. So we're going to look a little bit at that.
Speak for my
Now, here we go. Let me just make sure that's the best res we can get on this. 360p, it's got to go better than that. Yeah, so before we even get started on this, now, one thing I would like to just point out before we even listen to what he has to say, we're going to get to that, is if you look behind, see, the guy with the nice long beard, that's Alexander Dugin, by the way. See, you look behind him, and just remember, the thing about a conference like the Alternatives to Globalization conference is that they have little breakout sessions. So all sorts of organizations that participate in the conference get to, book rooms, and they have their own little meetings. And so here, he's not addressing the entire conference. Now, let's leave aside the fact that, it's already dodgy as fuck that a conference would allow a fascist group like, if you'll notice, the International Eurasian Movement, led by Alexander Dugin, to participate in it. That's enough reason to be a bit suspicious of it. But see, he specifically decided to address this fascist group at this conference.
speak for myself when I'm here, but I find this moment to be somewhat pivotal for me. To be sitting here next to Alexander Dugin. The first time I heard the name Dugin, it was thrown at me as an epithet, and it was in...
Well, yes, that's because he's a fascist, Caleb. And that's not generally a good thing to be.
2014, and at that time I was a card-carrying member of a Marxist-Leninist political party, and at that time, folks will recall the overthrowing of the elected government of Ukraine and the installation of a pro-Western regime. And as that was taking place, I, based on my understanding of how to understand the world and the training that I'd received as a Marxist-Leninist, it appeared to me that what was happening should be opposed, and that...
Okay, and this leads you to fascism how?
That the forces in the East who were resisting this regime being imposed by the West, they should be supported. And around that time, a number of people began to denounce me in left-wing circles. I was called Nazbol. I was called a...
Well, you're at a fucking Nazbol group here. See, he's not at the Alternatives to Globalization conference. He isn't addressing the whole conference. He's addressing a fucking Nazbol group. That's what this is. That's what the International Eurasian Movement is. They're fascists. So basically what he's saying is, they called him that, so he decided to become that.
rhinocerist, and one of the favorite epithets that people began throwing at me was I was called a Duganist. And I did not know what a Duganist was. I did not know who Alexander Dugin was, so I had to look into this. I had to look it up. And around that time, I was also traveling. In 2014, I first visited the Islamic Republic of Iran. I attended...
Yes. And for him, vacation is what's called heroic activism.
A conference in Iran. And I was in Iran, and I saw in Iran a society that had broken free from Western capitalism. Their national industries were under the control of the public, the oil was under the control of the public, the banking was under the control of the public, the state was working to mobilize the population to raise the living standards. It seemed to have broken free from this free market capitalist system that we have in the West. And when I was in Iran, I remember at this conference I attended, many of the guests from around the world said to me, "You've got to read the writings of Alexander Dugin."
Okay, I was kind of wondering, what kind of conference were you at in Iran? I somehow don't think it was a communist conference, because communists in Iran not treated very well. Yeah. So he was at a conference where a bunch of people were recommending fast shit to him.
And then, oddly enough, I went to Venezuela. I was in Venezuela in 2015. And in Venezuela, this was
oddly?
a Marxist government. The leader was quoting, Lenin and Trotsky and such. But I noticed that there was a clear difference in the way that the activists in Venezuela were talking. They talked a lot different than the leftists in the United States talked. And when I brought this up with the Venezuelans, they said to me, "Oh, you really ought to read Alexander Dugin."
Yes, which, again, leads you to wonder whether he was actually talking to leftists at all. Yes, people who are interested in reading fast shit and recommend fast shit to read, yeah, they do talk a little bit different than leftists do, Caleb.
And so, with all of these people mentioning Dugin to me, with people accusing me of being a Duganist, I thought it would be best that I actually study the writings of Alexander Dugin. So,
well, yeah, and he's sitting here, like, chortling along there, right there. That's Dugin with the big beard sitting right next to him. Because he finds it as ridiculous. That he was accused of being fash, and he decided to become fash. See, a lot of people, if they were accused of being fash, like, people who aren't fash would immediately say, wait, either it's a ridiculous accusation altogether, and they just laugh it off because the person doesn't know what they're talking about, or it's because they said something or did something and they really, really fucked up. And then it results in a certain amount of introspection, Caleb. It does not normally result in people saying, well, okay, fast shit's kind of cool then.
I had to get a copy of The Fourth Political Theory, and I read the book cover to cover, and it was fascinating to me as someone who'd only really studied the political left and the ideology.
The Fourth Political Theory. Okay, let's look this up. I think I know which one this is, but let me just... Political Theory. Summary. In the book... Okay, this is just Wikipedia, but, I was just looking for confirmation of what I was pretty sure it was. In the book, Dugin states that he is laying the foundation for an entirely new political ideology, the Fourth Political Theory. You see, which is cute, because actually this is just third position, which integrates and supersedes liberal democracy, Marxism, and fascism. It integrates them, which is to say, it includes fascism in it. Well, yeah. So he read the Fourth Political Theory, and he didn't say, well, wait a second. He didn't say, oh, okay, fuck this. He said, apparently, I need to meet this fucking guy.
Ideology around it to see a wider analysis of the world. And there were many things in the book that I did agree with. The most essential being this understanding of what liberalism is, and this understanding that there is this ideology coming out of, the Western countries, the United States, Western Europe, and that seeks to put the individual above all else and break down any sense of collectivism or bond or community.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Yes, fascism also doesn't like liberalism. Lots of people don't like liberalism. Not all of them good, Caleb. See, I mean, what amazes me is that he seems to think that it's like this is some sort of a revelation to him. Like, analyzing and rejecting liberalism? Yeah, lots of people who aren't fash have done that, Caleb. I mean, like, pretty much every fucking serious leftist theorist of, well, ever. Well, since liberalism has existed. But, I mean, I think it can't really. The entire time in which liberalism has existed also more or less coincides with when there can really be said to be a left. That's my hot take anyway. I'm not married to it, but I think that's about right. Because because liberalism and capitalism come naturally together. They're a package deal, and the left, as a rejection of capitalism, really couldn't exist exactly without having a capitalism to reject and propose an alternative to. So, yeah, you don't need to read fast shit to find people slagging off liberalism and actually make.
And that this liberalism
Everybody
has a
hates
left-wing
liberalism.
face and it has a right-wing face. And as I read the fourth political theory,
This is like novel to him.
I noticed that I had been kind of aware of what he was describing in this text for a long time. Because I myself, I'm not from New York City. I'm not from Los Angeles, California. I'm
Yeah, not New York City with the international bankers.
from the heartland of the United States. I grew up in rural Ohio. The town I lived in had less than 5,000 people in it. And I got attracted to left-wing ideas because I saw leaders like Fidel Castro, and Kim Jong-il and others. And
He was inspired by. He was inspired by fucking Kim Jong Il of all people. Not Kim Il Sung, but Kim Jong Il. Like, okay, he is easily the least inspirational of all the Kims, for fuck's sake. It's not that Kim Il Sung was great either, but at least he had an idea of some kind, and then he just kind of endlessly modified it in order to justify whatever the hell he was doing at a given time. Kim Jong Il was just his son. He was the boss's kid, and so he got put in charge of the chaeboy. That's a large corporation in Korean. Well, actually, I think they originally get it from Japanese because Japanese has the exact same. Well, but the term roughly describes how North Korea works. So it was inspired by Kim Jong Il. Like, seriously, what was fucking inspirational about that guy?
these are leaders that are leading their country. They're controlling the economy and raising people up out of poverty.
Kim Jong Il was raising people out of poverty? When? I mean, most of Kim Jong Il's period actually. See, people were better off in North Korea before Kim Jong Il took over. Now, that's not all down to Kim Jong Il, to be clear. I mean, that was down to the fact that the Soviet Union was underwriting their economy and their nuclear deterrent. And that the massive deforestation they'd done in order to create farmland in a region that really just hasn't got any good farmland hadn't yet come back to bite them in the ass in the form of natural flooding that would have been prevented if they'd kept those trees up and destroying all their crops. I mean, Kim Jong Il wasn't. I mean, Kim Jong Il's thing was not raising people out of poverty. His thing was Songun, the military first policy. And if you watched North Korean media during Kim Jong Il's reign, which I did, the latter half of it, like lifting people out of poverty was not high on the list. I mean, that it was all about the military. He was very serious about the military first policy. That's what Songun means. I mean, if he'd said Kim Jong Un, even, I mean, because Kim Jong Un, at the very least at the propaganda level, has been shifting the focus to raising living standards. I mean, but okay, this is just. First of all, Kim Jong Il as an inspirational figure is already a bit much, and raising people out of poverty. They weren't being raised out of poverty. They were actually better off in the 80s than they were at any time in the 90s in North Korea.
and
They were better in the
fighting
70s than the
against
80s.
imperialism, and that's what I was attracted to. And when I got involved in organized political leftist groups, I noticed that there was something very, very different about them. That I would get excited about Fidel Castro and seeing revolutionary armies marching in uniforms and such. And
Okay, so he has a thing for goose stepping. Yeah, you see, totally not fash there.
leftists would tell me, "Oh no, we don't talk that way." I would go to meetings and I would see people, intentionally wearing clothes that were all ripped and had holes in them. And I would think, are they not professional? Do they not want to?
Okay, Jesus, he's so fucking bushy. Yeah, this is the guy who was saying that Thought Slime isn't working class because he pronounced Burger King in a funny way. This is the guy whose working class cred was he worked in a sandwich shop for 6 months in college, and he wouldn't even give the name of the sandwich shop.
I always felt very odd in left circles, and
Yeah, I can understand that. You would be odd. You are not a good fit in left circles.
it was very strange, and I just felt like what had attracted me to the leftist ideology was very different than the people I was around.
Well, yes, because you liked fucking goose stepping and like Kim Jong. Yeah, I still can't get out of all the fucking inspirational figures you could pick out of like in Korea, in North Korea specifically. Kim Jong Il is just like the one thing that he was any good at was making movies, and he even fucked that up.
And then I began to do some reading, and I became aware of something which is, at this point, one of the programs that the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency brags about being its greatest achievement. And if you Google it, you can Google the phrase Congress for Cultural Freedom. And if you Google this, the first thing that will come up is the website of the U.S. CIA. And starting in 1940...
Oh, okay, here he is again. The CIA also funded modern art. And mostly it was a propaganda, yeah, and, apparently indirectly, I'm not sure if directly or indirectly, maybe it was directly, I'm not entirely sure of the history on that, but, the idea was a propaganda effort above all in order to showcase the supposed intellectual diversity of the U.S., with certain very clear and deliberate exceptions.
In 1949, there was a conference sponsored by the U.S. Communist Party and the Soviet Union in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And it was a conference of artists and intellectuals and scientists, all of which were opposing the U.S. drive in the Cold War and were opposing U.S. imperialism. And the CIA looked at this conference and was furious about it. How could all these smart intellectuals, how could they be associated with the Soviet Union? And so they began a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, in which they sought to create a gap between Western leftist intellectuals and the Soviet Union. And they noticed that this gap already existed to some extent, and that when the Soviet Union began...
In fact, there was a gap between Russian leftist intellectuals and the Soviet Union as well.
In the first years, it was promoting, an ultra-liberalism. Homosexuality was legalized, abortion was legal and such. But as the Soviet Union progressed...
Okay, that's ultra-liberalism. Like, basic... Okay, there we go. Notice that. So, decriminalizing homosexuality and making abortion legal, that's ultra-liberalism. It's not just basic fucking human rights, mind you. And as it progressed...
especially during the 5-year plans and the rise of Stalin, it became much more socially conservative. And many of the left-wing, cosmopolitan, middle-class...
Cosmopolitan, okay, another little dog whistle to go along with his favorite international bankers.
Intellectuals who'd been attracted to the Soviet Union, they were quite uncomfortable with what they saw as a social conservatism emerging in Soviet society. And the Central Intelligence Agency saw this cultural gap between the Western left and the Soviet Union as something that they could utilize to make a division. And
well, no, they saw a division that already existed and decided to capitalize on it. And the thing is, the question is whether the division was actually justified. And yeah, the division was justified because, queer communists in particular are going to have a hell of a time coming up with a good reason to be enthusiastic in supporting a state that claims to be communist but scabs on queer people in the working class. Uh, um, Now, of course, so that's a division that's kind of inherent and necessary. That when Stalin started doing all sorts of reactionary shit, including the stroke of brilliance, where he not only signed a pact with with Hitler, but actually thought Hitler was going to live by it, to the extent of not really doing much of anything to protect his western border, even where it directly contacted the uh, easternmost points in the already expanding Germany. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of people were turned off by that. That, see, the fact that you see, Caleb, the ruling class is going to use divisions whether they're legit or not. Just because the ruling class tries to exploit a division does not make it less legitimate.
And they began funding magazines. There was a Trotskyist magazine called Partisan Review, which was circulated all across the United States. And a lot of the prominent names of the American left now, Noam Chomsky, Susan Sontag, they began with this publication. Furthermore, they funded art galleries. They promoted, what they call modern art. There's people just throwing art, throwing paint onto a canvas and saying this is art. It's progressive because it doesn't look like anything. And they did.
Ah, yes. I mean, now he's starting to sound like Richard Dawkins talking about fucking Kafka's Metamorphosis. Yeah, you see, here's the thing, again. When you have a pre-existing publication, the way these things usually work is the CIA doesn't just knock on your door when you're, Partisan Review, you're some Trotskyist magazine. The CIA operates through cutouts. They anonymize their donations because the thing is, if a Trotskyist magazine starts getting money that says, yes, oh, it's addressed from Langley, Virginia, and it says, oh, it's from the Central Intelligence Agency, yeah, they might smell a rat there, and they might say a few things about it, even. They might even turn down the money, and then that fucks up their whole program. So the CIA does not actually tend to fund things directly like that. They set up cutouts. They set up little organizations like fake companies or fake people's names. And so the donations come in, and it feels like, okay, maybe more donations than usual, but no identities that would freak out a leftist. So, the likelihood that Partisan Review knew exactly what they were being funded by and were in fact acting on instructions from the CIA is quite, quite low. They most likely just continued doing exactly what they were doing, because the ideal situation when you're like funding an organization in order to exercise influence is that the organization's already doing one aspect of a thing you'd like to do. In this case, for example, being a leftist group that doesn't, a leftist perspective that doesn't think very highly of Stalinism. They're already doing the thing that you would like to see happen in order to create that, in order to encourage that sort of division that already existed. So you don't necessarily want to exercise direct influence in that situation, openly come out and start giving instructions, because that gets messy. Somebody might end up talking about it. Too many people are in on it. So, yeah, you'll get people who are saying these things. You will get people who were published in there at the time most likely would not have had any idea who was funding Partisan Review. And Chomsky in particular basically doesn't give a shit where he's published. I mean, he had an interview that turned out published in Penthouse. Apparently he didn't even ask where it was going to be, and then somebody asked him, and he was completely caught LBW by it. So, yeah. Again, the question, he's sort of, let's see where he's going to take this. He seems to be suggesting that a division between the left and the Soviet Union is inherently a bad thing.
All kinds kinds of things to try and influence the
No
kind
matter
of
the reason.
circles where the Soviet Union and the Marxist-Leninist current had influence, and to try and pull them out of the Soviet sphere. And it's interesting.
Well, Trotskyists were already out of the Soviet sphere.
One of these intellectuals, who
Particularly in
was
Stalin's
essentially,
day.
part of this program to divert leftism away from the Soviet Union was an individual named Susan Sontag. And in the 1980s, she was addressing a demonstration in New York City in support of the anti-Soviet uprisings in Poland. And she made a statement, and I read this statement and it really stuck with me. She said, "Communism is nothing but the most successful form of fascism."
Okay, and so he took this to heart, and he decided that the best way to become a successful communist was just to be fash.
And when you read that statement, you think, what could she possibly mean? We know all the fascist leaders hated communism with all their heart and soul. That's what they were all about.
Yes, you're in a room addressing one now. They don't need to be told that they hate communism.
And furthermore, all the communist leaders hated fascism with all that they were about.
So what does that make you, Caleb?
What is she getting at? And the new or the modern left, if you really look at what they're about something quite different than the people who created the Soviet Union.
Well, yes, because we're about communism, and the people who created what the Soviet Union ultimately became turned out not to like communism very
And
much.
they're pushing quite a different agenda. And as I had been coming up as an activist and eventually going on my own ways and leaving the Marxist-Leninist group I had been a member of for almost a decade, I began to notice that all along I had been something different.
No shit. Yeah, that's my point. And so that's why when people call you a Nazbol, they're not, they're not wrong. Yes, so people were noticing that you had fashy tendencies before you decided to just go outright and do it.
When it got down to it, I was a populist. And
Oh, God. Yeah, a populist. God, this is the most meaningless term ever. I mean, mostly, that's just a way to euphemize fash.
populism in U.S. history, it's so bizarre that in every publication, the New York Times, the Foreign Affairs publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, anything in the United States, populism is the number one enemy. It's what we're supposed to be afraid of. Populism is evil. Populism is bad. Populism, there's Anne Marie Slaughter of the Council on Foreign Relations. She wrote an article saying the battle in the world today is the battle between the open international system, she called it, and populism. And populism is, it's Adolf Hitler, she says, it's Pinochet, but it's also Evo Morales.
Okay, which is bizarre, because Pinochet was not populist. I mean, he wasn't even trying to be populist. He was very much a man for the tiny minority, the white rich minority, living in Las Condes, in Vitacura, El Arrayán, and Lo Barnechea. He was never a populist. He was never that. He was not even a guy who had any meaningful political ambitions until an opportunity, namely to take over the group that was plotting the coup, just kind of dropped in his lap. By virtue of being in charge of the largest ground forces in Chile. I mean, so that's just a bizarre thing. Okay. But, I mean, then again, populist as a term has lost all meaning.
It's also Vladimir Putin, it's also Hugo Chavez. All of these populist regimes, they need to be replaced with the open international system, she said.
And that's the other weird thing, because if anything, Pinochet's thing was opening Chile to the international system. Just privatizing the shit out of everything, selling it to multinationals, including, and just sometimes just giving it to multinationals. So, like, this already makes no fucking sense.
And if you read U.S. history, populism really should be a good thing. I mean, there's a long history of populism in American history. Coming out of the Civil War and the struggle to abolish slavery, there was a populist party. And as the Republican Party moved into being more of a capitalist and a free market party, the mass movement of small farmers and radicals who had fought for the abolition of slavery in the United States, they formed the Populist Party.
Yeah. That's the history, but the term these days, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. These days, it is both a euphemism for fash and a way of low-key equating leftist, left-leaning governments and fash.
And they called for the nationalization of the railroads. And they called for the redistribution of land, the fight against the big monopolies. And they fought for an interpretation of Christianity that would favor the downtrodden and the poor and not favor greed and the rich, as was being promoted by some of the big denominations in the United States. And populism was being portrayed as a bad thing. We have individuals like Huey Long. Huey Long was the governor of Louisiana, the state in the United States during the 1930s. And he is, if you go to Louisiana, he is loved.
Okay. Yes, Huey Long, and it's an interesting one to come up with. Okay. American fascist Lawrence Dennis described Long as the nearest approach to a national fascist leader in the United States. That's from, let me see. Cited in Huey Long and the Dictators by Edward F. Haas in Louisiana History, The Journey of the Louisiana Historical. So once again, the positive political examples he comes up with, people who the fascists liked. Dude, like, I can see, you seeing the pattern here. I'm seeing it. Well, he's seeing it. That's why he's there.
So many bridges are named after him. There are monuments to Huey Long everywhere, and anyone who was
there are monuments to fucking Nathan Bedford Forrest too.
In the 1930s would tell you he was the most popular governor they ever had, and he was considered a populist, and he redistributed. He taxed the oil money, and he used it to feed people and care for people. But yet, Huey Long, on a national scale, outside of Louisiana, where he actually had his power, is one of the most demonized figures in U.S. history. There's fictionalized films, All the King's Men and such, and we hear, in our school textbooks, we learn that Huey Long was the dictator of Louisiana. But you go to Louisiana, everyone remembers him as being the greatest governor they ever had. They wouldn't have roads.
Who's everybody? We talking white people? I think we're talking white people.
They wouldn't have bridges. They wouldn't even have school textbooks if it weren't for Huey Long, the man who laid the foundation. So populism, it's been widely distorted. And the way you read it in the United States, it's almost as if to be a populist is the equivalent of being a Ku Klux Klansman. That's what we're told. If you're a populist, you want to dangle African Americans from trees and kill them, and that's just not the reality of what populism is. But because any notion of populism has really been abandoned by the left.
Because populism, like Huey Long in particular, very much anti-left. In fact, he said, somebody suggested that his sort of social democratic kind of programs were communism, and he said, no, this is the best defense that there is against communism. He was not the left. He was against the left. This was the ruling class's way of trying to blunt the left at a time when actually you had massive trade union organization, a lot of it very radical, very militant. You had actually some real tangible gains being made as well. And in a context like that, you get politicians like this. And the whole idea is that it kind of calms people down a little bit. Because you can sort of divide up movements if the ruling class is handing out a few concessions. Because the people who receive the concessions often will feel, they got theirs, so they don't need to continue fighting. And the people who didn't end up getting left alone. This is the oldest fucking trick in the book.
We're starting to see this demonization of populism in all circles. In the United States, there is a real confusion about how to move forward, and the organized political left is kind of at a loss. A lot of the constituency in organized political leftist groups is very generational. It's been in their family for years. Their parents came to the United States in the 1920s or 30s, and they were members of the Communist Party. Then their children, grew up to be the 1960s New Left and opposed the Vietnam War and burned their draft cards. And now their children are Antifa and anarchists and breaking the windows of banks and attacking people and such. And demographic in the United States is dying. Uh, uh, Most of the individuals in that demographic no longer call themselves left.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because, if anything, it turns out turning out to oppose fascists turned out to be pretty fucking popular. I mean, yes, obviously not popular with Caleb Maupin, who prefers to suck up to them.
And this
But
is kind of urban, cosmopolitan, middle class
oh, cosmopolitan again.
grouping that defined leftism in U.S. history is vanishing.
Oh, and also came to the U.S. in the 1920s. Yeah, again, I mean, these are dog whistles. You combine all those, and what you've got is Jews. That's who he's talking about. He's pretty much always talking about
However,
Jews.
there are many people in the United States who are opposed to capitalism. And, during the presidential election, I'm a leftist, I come out of a left background, but I saw Donald Trump's...
He comes out of a left background, really? I mean, define left background, because what you've said is that your father was some sort of a rich banker who, and you're fucking. This is interesting because he's changed his origin story here, because his previous origin story was that his father had taken him along on a business trip to Ecuador, and in Ecuador, he suddenly saw that there was poverty, and that changed him. Because somehow he'd managed to avoid seeing it in the U.S. and still manages to avoid seeing it in the U.S. Really. And now it's just, he was inspired by Kim Jong Il and Castro. I mean, I can get being inspired by Castro. I can get that. There are a lot of just really brilliant achievements that in Cuba. It's still state capitalism. It is not. I would not, if the U.S. or any other place I was living managed to get to that point, I would not say, okay, we've won, we don't have to keep fighting, because no, that's just the new configuration that capitalism takes, and we still have to fucking fight that. But yeah, so where the hell was I?
Speak. And there were many times that he spoke, and I applauded. I heard him talk about how, there's this elite that is not loyal to the United States, these international bankers. I applauded when he said that.
Okay, why? I mean, let's see, this is the guy who lectures people about communism, and here he's applauding because somebody says that there is an elite of international bankers who are not loyal to the imperialist monstrosity that is the U.S.? He's okay. So what? I mean, there are only two ways to read that, because I don't really think, the whole rest of his political persona is not about loyalty to the U.S., certainly. All the rest of it is about, basically, it's loyalty to anyone who opposes the U.S., no matter, and, calling them socialists, whatever they actually are. So it can't be the loyalty to the U.S. thing. It has to be the anti-Semitic thing.
When he talked about how, in Syria, or in Iraq and all these countries, we have attacked them, and the result has been terrorism getting stronger, and that the U.S. population is gaining nothing from these wars, I applauded when he said that. Now, I didn't agree with Trump about certain issues like immigration, certain issues like empowering the policing agencies in the United States, but in many ways, Trump was better than Hillary Clinton when it came to the concerns that are important to me.
Which is really a bizarre thing to say, because actually he, on foreign policy, is basically the same as Hillary Clinton. I mean, he was more aggressive against Russia than Obama was. In fact, when it came to Ukraine, which is supposedly a big turning point for Caleb, see, the Obama administration had held off on sending military aid to the fascist-backed government in Ukraine because they thought it was unnecessarily provocative. Trump sent military aid to the Ukrainian fascists. I mean, this is just the most incoherent hot mess of a political outlook I've seen in a long time. I mean, really, no wonder he feels so comfortable with fash.
Bernie Sanders, he was removed from the race, and we had the choice of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And there were many people who would have voted for Bernie Sanders who voted for Donald Trump in the election.
Not as many as is claimed.
I mean, this future that's offered, you talk about the life that millennial Americans, that's what they call those of us in the United States born in the 1990s or the late 1980s, they call us millennials. And the future that is being offered to us by that, by the society is very grim. You know, millennials essentially, they are never allowed to become adults. They never are able to achieve the income level their parents had. They have a very low standard of living, and they essentially live out their adult life as if they're children almost. It's very weird. Anything that is conceived of as taking responsibility or growing up or being an adult is kind of frowned on. And young
example needed.
Americans are essentially encouraged to just permanently act like irresponsible children, to not have children of their own, to not buy homes of their own, to just kind of, you know, work a low-paying job, use drugs, and just kind of live this lifestyle in which one pursues, you know.
God, I mean, he's sounding so much. This guy, mark my words, whatever in like 10 years' time, I think he's going to be on PragerU. He just gets the fucking PragerU aesthetic perfectly.
Hedonistic pleasures, and that's the future that the society is offering.
Wait a second. Okay, so the idea is that there's a low living standard. Everybody's broke, and they're having hedonistic pleasures. When? See, this is so ridiculous. But this is how you know that this guy has never actually had to live off one of these these fucking starvation wage jobs. Because the thing is, you're working for $7 an hour, $8 an hour. You're not getting much hedonistic pleasure with that. I mean, you're probably working 3 jobs. You don't even get the hedonistic pleasure of 8 hours of fucking sleep. Where's he even?
And if you want to look beyond that, and if you want to talk about reorganizing U.S. society to serve the public and to serve the people in U.S. society, and if you want to question foreign policy in the United States, the second you do that, you're called a fascist.
You see, fun fact. I've been saying all sorts of very provocatively worded things about U.S. foreign policy for, going on, first thing that I wrote on that would have been 1996, 1997, so we're talking... 25 years, roughly, quarter of a century. Can't remember when somebody called me a fascist for it. Called me lots of other things. I've been called plenty of other stuff. I'm why the terrorists win or whatever. No one ever called me a fascist. I think that's probably because, I wasn't saying fast shit.
And you cannot do that. To be a communist, one of the right-wing commentators in the United States, he put out on Twitter, he said that, communism is an ideology that can only appeal to those who hate themselves. And I looked at...
Well, I mean, if you equate communism with Caleb Maupin, that's certainly true.
And I thought, Fidel Castro, does he hate himself? Did Stalin hate himself? But if you look at the modern...
What the hell did Stalin have to do with communism? Or Fidel Castro, for that matter?
Going around and protesting against Donald Trump. That makes sense. A lot of them are self-hating, and there's a real...
Self-hating? Yeah, really?
Worship of weakness in left-wing circles. Anything that is perceived of as weakness or disempowering, that's worship. And anything that is conceived of as strength or showing pride in oneself or building up one's strength, that's attacked, and that's said, well, that's fascist. You can't...
I can't, for the life of me, figure out why anyone would suggest that this guy's fash, just because he's talking about the culture of weakness in the left, in the company of a bunch of well-dressed fascists. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where anyone could possibly be getting that from, really.
You can't be like that. The first thing that happens to young people when they go to the university and they take gender studies or race studies or queer studies is they're immediately told that that their identity, the way that they are as a person, is wrong.
Really? You see, okay. Again, we're okay. Who is being told? Okay, we'll leave aside the fact that he's totally oversimplifying and distorting the shit out of all of this, but you do He's talking about he's referring to he's claiming that white people are self-hating if they oppose racism here. That's what's going on. That he's
They
trying to
need
appeal
to
to
learn to
straight white
hate
people,
themselves more. That's the message
cishet
the
white
left is
people.
giving young Americans.
To hate themselves more, really? See, that's funny because where the hell, where's this message being sent? Which young Americans?
And not surprisingly, it's not a very attractive message. It's really not an attractive message, and it's not only for white Americans. I will say, Black Lives Matter, which is this activist group that has been funded and supported by the highest levels of the U.S. political establishment.
Yeah, bullshit. Okay, there are groups that have raised a whole lot of funds appropriating the name Black Lives Matter. I mean, when you actually start to look at companies with that in their name, companies and like nonprofits and shit, there are lots of them. That's not the movement. That's not the movement. That's people who figured out that they could probably make some money off the movement. Maybe some of them are even also doing something worthwhile. Some of them are definitely grifting. But that's not the fucking movement. The Black Lives Matter was never just an organization. It was never any kind of hierarchical thing. It was more a rallying cry, and is more a rallying cry than anything. I mean, again, when he's starting to talk like this, I mean, this is just straight up right wing talking points.
One of their primary goals is to attack the Nation of Islam, which is one of the most powerful black nationalist groups in the United States.
He's bringing up Farrakhan again. Jesus Christ, he stands this guy a lot. I mean, can he just he could just shorten this so much by saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm anti-Semitic." Yeah, clip that shit. Yeah. But see, the fun thing about Nation of Islam, apart from all the other shit, they have a deal with Scientology. They're the vector for allowing Scientology to exploit the black community. Farrakhan willingly offered up his organization for this purpose.
And in just the recent months, there have been efforts and just a demand on every prominent black activist in the United States to denounce Louis Farrakhan. Why? Because Louis Farrakhan is a black fascist, we are told. He's anti-Semitic. He has said things about Jews that are not very nice.
He said things about Jews that are not very nice? He denies the fucking Holocaust. He says that the world is controlled by satanic Jews. Not very nice. Fuck you.
He made statements about Hitler. So anyone...
Yeah, he said Hitler was a genius.
That's the organization of Malcolm X. I mean, this is the...
No, it is. Well, it was. He eventually left it.
An organization with deep roots, but the demand...
In fact, it's an organization that is suspected to have had something to do with Malcolm X's death, because that split was not entirely amicable.
From the left is that all black activists distance themselves from this organization.
Okay, the left? See, the only example I can think of this happening was, at the White Women's March. I mean, it is scrupulously maintained a White Women's March. They basically, they kicked off, even, at the organizational level. I mean, this whole fucking Democratic Front bogus ass walk to the park and call it a protest. So some representatives of the Democratic Party, some of their fucking surrogates, first found all sorts of excuses to kick off Linda Sarsour because she was too Palestinian, and then there was this and then Farrakhan was brought up in order to get a black member off of the board, the organizing collective, whatever they call it. I mean, that's like the only example. That's not the left doing. That's the fucking Democrats. That's who was behind the Women's March. So, I mean, where's the left?
Because, again, it's pushing strength. It's not pushing shame. It's pushing an agenda of raising people out of poverty. It's pushing...
it's pushing Scientology, which is an agenda of milking people into poverty. But you were sort of speaking negatively in a negative context, about anti-fascists earlier, and I mean that's certainly pushing strength because the idea is physically forcing fascists off of the street. And I know that whole idea makes you a bit nervous because you like to hang out with fascists. Maybe if you didn't hang out with fascists, it wouldn't make you so nervous, Caleb. But yeah, that's kind of strength too. Like, I mean, Jesus.
A black identity. So this is widespread, and what
Yeah, because the Nation of Islam is the only organization pushing a black identity. Like, seriously.
what Mr. Dugan has described in his work, which I mean is very meaningful, and people are reading it all over the world, is very real, and people should engage with his ideas. When I first began researching Mr. Dugan, I remember there were so many interviews in English by experts on his work, and none of them had ever read his writings. You know, I mean, I would see interviews with people about Mr. Dugan, and they would say, well, Alexander Dugan, he's written books about why Russia should take over the entire world and colonize the entire world. It's very interesting.
I mean, citation needed, yeah, but I mean, I can imagine it because there's no end of fucking bullshit written about anything to do with Russia, which is why people actually in the US have this idea that Alexei Navalny, who is a minor, actually quite unpopular, fascist politician in Russia, is somehow the opposition. But, I mean, still.
I've read some of it myself, and this is what they said. And it's almost, it's a caricature. But if you actually read what Dugan has
You're
to
a caricature.
It's on point in many ways. Now, the only point of disagreement I would really have is that I do think that there is a notion of historical progress. And I think one of the primary activities that...
Wait, okay, when this... You seem to be applauding kind of the fact that earlier, when the Soviet Union was kind of on the side of historical progress with the decriminalizing homosexuality and abortion, you derided that as ultra-liberalism. So, what is your vision of historical progress? I mean, you mentioned a lot about goose-stepping. That's moving forward. That inspired you. So I guess that's kind of technically progress. It is pro-greeting. It's moving forward.
That the global elite is engaging in right now is holding back progress.
The global elite. Oh, more anti-Semitic buzzwords.
Essentially is a destructive left. The message that they give is that, you know, people have it too good these days, right? The environment is being destroyed. You know, we can't have people, you know, live more, you know, comfortable lifestyles. That'll destroy the earth, you know.
Okay. Citation needed.
And this notion that people should live a comfortable life, this is hedonistic, and we need to.
You were just condemning hedonism. You were suggesting that the place that you find hedonism was broke ass millennials, dude.
To do more of an ancient Eastern thing. You know, the modern left is very.
Who the hell's talking about an ancient Eastern thing? What decade is he from?
Very much opposed to the notion of raising the world out of poverty, and they have this fascination with chaos and destruction.
God, I mean, it's like it's just like an audition tape, one after another for PragerU with this bullshit.
You know, the second that the revolution is victorious, they denounce it, right? Because that...
well, maybe that's because, you see, here's one of the things that he always does. He will not engage with the arguments he's, like, trying to rip into on their own terms. See, the thing is, the reason that the people he's talking about will denounce a revolution that claims to be victorious, like, is because a lot of the time what happened is somebody, like, co-opted the fucking revolution, claimed victory in order to just sort of mollify the working class, and that was it. Yeah. The thing is, the revolution wasn't over there, dude. Just because you fucking take state power doesn't mean the revolution is over. It doesn't mean it's victorious. It turns out that communism isn't when the government does it, Caleb.
It's an autocratic regime that's violating human rights. But as long as it's just people in the streets breaking windows, smashing things, tearing things down, they love it. You know, all throughout the United States, they are tearing down Confederate monuments, right?
What, you object to this now?
The Confederacy was an awful thing. I mean, not just for African Americans, but for white people. I do not defend the Confederacy. But they're not replacing those statues with anything.
Well, so what? The statues shouldn't exist. They shouldn't be there. They shouldn't have been put there in the first place. To get rid of them doesn't mean you have to have first gone to your fucking statuary workshop and knocked out your own. Because you know what happens when you put an unauthorized statue on a plinth? Yeah, that shit gets torn apart. You end up losing it. It gets dragged off to the tip. So that's a whole lot of work for fucking nothing. Or you can, of course, dedicate all your, like, political and physical energy to defending something that you put on a plinth against the cops. Which, I mean, I don't know about you, but I can think of more important fights to have right now. So really?
Because the notion on the political left is not just that it's wrong to have Confederate statues. The notion is that it's wrong to have statues of anything. One shouldn't
That's just bullshit.
be worshiping anything. The idea that you have heroes that you aspire to become, this is wrong. That's the message that's coming out of the modern left that is very carefully funded and controlled. You can go back
Citation needed.
to the 1950s with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, but there's a much more recent examples of their activities. I mean,
Well, why don't you give one of those instead of keeping on harping on this shit from the 1950s? Like, who are these people who you're saying are funded? Because, by the way, he works for RT, so he is at least in part funded by the Russian government. So it's not like he's entirely opposed to letting the ruling class fund him.
at this point, the Institute for Policy Studies, the Rockefeller Foundations, the Ford Foundation.
Well, yeah, where what communist group are you saying is getting money from those people?
Most people in the United States who espouse what appears to be a leftist ideology are being subsidized by the U.S. government, whether directly or indirectly.
Then why is it that the only example you can come up with is from the 1950s? I mean, surely you can come up with something more recent so that we can actually have this fucking conversation. Because, you see, the thing is, and he must know this, I mean, unless he's just impressively oblivious, that there is a whole fucking debate. There's a lot of actually writing and activism around the NGO industrial complex, the nonprofit industrial complex, and the importance of not taking their money because it nerfs your struggle. So, I mean, if he's got examples of, actual left groups that are taking that kind of money, then it would be nice if he pointed them out, because it would be interesting to know what groups they actually were, and there would probably, if it checked out, which it's Caleb Maupin, so who knows whether it would check out or not, people would probably do something about that shit.
And it is an attempt to make sure,
at the very least,
what we saw with Huey Long, what we saw with genuine American populism doesn't reemerge.
Huey Long was, he was specifically trying to shut down the left by providing a few token concessions.
And so, the ideas that Mr. Dugan has promoted have been very meaningful for me in trying to make sense of what's going on in the world. And I thank you for the invitation to speak at this very important gathering. And I'm here learning. I'm hearing from different voices, and I'm open at this point. The fact that there have been so many articles accusing me of being a Duganist before I even read Dugan's writings makes me.
It should make you fucking wonder how you fucked up.
There's something that I have to learn, so I'm here to listen.
You do have a lot to learn, I'll give you that, but, I mean, from these fuckers? Yeah, look at that little fucking grin, too. Jesus. Okay, that's done. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean, I had... Oh, hey! Gizmo, okay, sorry I didn't see any of this chat. Oh, hi, Erica, Gizmo Girl, all these people. Yeah, I mean, see, it had been suggested to me that maybe that people were taking Caleb's speech to these fascists out of context. So I decided to just do it all in context. That was the full length of the fucking thing that he gave, specifically to not just to the conference on alternatives to globalization that includes fascists, but to the fascists who were included in the conference on alternatives to globalization. So yeah, that's the context there. That's God, what? Oh. And now I actually have to wrap this up. The Women's SCC. Yes, that, let me see, where are we now in this thing? Oh, God. Okay. It's 1 o'clock, and I'm going to have to, and I may be waking people up if I do this for any longer, so I'm going to have to wrap up. Thank you, Gizmo Girl. Thank you, Erica, both of you in chat for showing up. I'm sorry I didn't notice your messages earlier. But, yeah. So, glad to see both of you, and I'm going to be clipping this this segment. I'm going to put this up sometime, probably even just tonight. It'll be an easy thing to clip. Or tomorrow. Oh, well, yeah. Well, you can see the whole thing once I get the clip on the clip of the entire thing off of this stream. I will just clip that off the recording and put that up on my YouTube channel. Yeah. Well, you missed a lot. You missed a lot because his origin story of what got him involved in the left, his inspiration was Kim Jong-il. And he liked watching what he called revolutionary armies goose-stepping down the streets. So, I mean, out of all the fucking North Korean figures to call an inspiration, Kim Jong-il is like the least inspirational Kim. He's easily the worst Kim. Like, there are even better things to be said about Kim Jong-un. Not least the fact that Kim Jong-un has clearly worked out that he needs to fucking distance himself a little bit from his dad. Then you can't find to say about Kim Jong-il. The one thing he even... I mean... He had he actually had 2 jobs. He only did one of them, and it was not the one that involved getting people some fucking food. Yeah, so have a very good night. I will be on tomorrow, same time. I look forward to seeing you, and check the channel a little bit later, sometime in the next 24 hours, and I will have the clip of this hot shit from Caleb Maupin. Have a very good night.